We should remember that we no longer have the workforce of women that we used to have. And if your women's groups are not working with the next generation, and you're frustrated because they're not showing up, we can remember a lot of women are working. They're not able to work 40 hours, do all the laundry, do the dishes, and then come to church as easily as they may have in the past. We have some barriers in our churches. One of the main barriers that we have is that oftentimes we expect people to put in their time before they become leaders in our congregations. And that makes sense because you know how it is. It takes trust to be a good leader, and trust takes time, and there's no way to shorten that at all. And yet, we're getting to a point in most of our congregations where we need to hear the voices of younger leadership. For instance, in our session, we have a good generational spread in our session. And we were talking about putting an ad in the Washington Post. So we're trying to figure this out. We're around the table, and the Washington Post, we have an ad about this big, maybe, in the Washington Post, and it's 90% of our evangelism budget. 90% for this ad that's this big in the Washington Post. So we were going back and forth about what we should do about this ad. You know, it's so much money, and how can we do this? I mean, the Post, it's a big newspaper, and can we afford this every week? And so we're going back and forth and back and forth, and finally I said, well, who reads the newspaper? I mean, like, who picks up a physical newspaper and reads it? And of course, we are in downtown DC, and most of the people who are there, they read the newspaper. They read the Post, they read the New York Times, they read the Wall Street Journal, they read all of these papers, but they're not picking up the physical paper. So everyone over 40 raised their hand. Everyone under 40 didn't. So we began to think about that. Well, what are we spending this 90% of our evangelism budget on? I think there's some people from the newspaper here. I'm so sorry. If you're here, I apologize. But what we did was we translated it into online ads. Online ads for the newspaper. We began to translate it into online ads. We began to take the money and redesign our website. We began to take the money and we began to check out Facebook and Google ads and tried all different sorts of ways in which we could take this evangelism money, which evangelism isn't just an ad in the paper. I realize that. I'm sorry. But there were some ways in which we could do this a little better. So we began podcasting, and we began to think, what does a younger generation read? What do they look at? What are they thinking about? What are they engaged with? And everything shifted because we listened to the group that was around that table. We needed them more than they need us, or more than they think they need us. We needed them. And so what I'm saying here is we can't always wait until someone's in our church for 10 years before we build up the trust, before we can start listening to them. But we need to start looking for people and start acting almost like we're new church developments, you know? We just have to start grabbing leadership quickly, start forming it, helping people to grow into their leadership instead of waiting until they become leaders. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? Sharing leadership is incredibly important. And also remember, most young adults may only have 2.5 years to be in your congregation. As a Presbyterian, we have term limits of 3 years and usually 6. And yet, we wonder when we come to people and we say, can you sign up for this 6-year job? Why they say no. They don't know if they're going to be around in another couple of years. So we've begun to talk about our pitch a little differently. We've begun saying, the term is this long. If you need to leave, or if you have something that comes up, if you're not able to complete your full term because you have to move, we understand. But we want you to know that it's this long. If people are moving around every 2.5 years, they may never become leaders in our churches if we have to wait for them to become leaders in our churches for a long time. I should be stopping now. Let me say what's working, and then I'll ask for questions. As I talk to different leaders, as I began to ask them, people who had really robust young adult ministries, and I talked to people in the South and in the North, in rural congregations and in big congregations, and I asked them what was working. And you know, it was very, very simple what was working. It was very much what the gospel is. It was loving God and loving neighbor and loving yourself. Loving God, a connection with God. There is a new yearning for spiritual things that's happening right now. It's hard to see it all the time. And sometimes when we go to churches and we're told that young adults, what they need is they need lots of pictures because young adults, they're the MTV generation. They're used to flashing pictures, and so you have to flash pictures at them all the time. And you need to have a giant screen up, and you need to flash pictures at them because that's what they like. And so people think, oh, that's how we're going to bring in the young adults. And it's funny because at the same time, the young adults, they're like rolling up their yoga mats and they're going to the yoga studio to sit, to meditate, to get some quiet. There's a disconnect happening here. And yet, as I began to talk to people and ask what was the most important thing in their congregation when they were reaching out to young adults, the number one answer I got was contemplative prayer. Connecting with God on a deep level. Contemplative prayer, taze, Iona, chants, people praying in silence, people learning to pray for one another, people building those relationships. Do you know what Twitter's about? I think 90% of Twitter is about, will you please pray for me? I mean, granted, I'm hanging out with a bunch of pastors on Twitter, but still, even with our church members, so much of it is, will you pray for me? Will you pray for me? Or, I'm praying for you. Connection with God, praying for one another, this deep spiritual connection, we can't get it anywhere else. Only here. And we have it here. We've had these practices growing in our bellies for 2,000 years. We have them to share. Loving God, loving your neighbors. I talked a little bit at the beginning about tribal churches. And can you hear now the sense of disconnection for people like me who move every 2 to 3 years, who may not know if they're going to be able to keep their job from one year to the next, who are always looking for signs of being laid off, who aren't able to own their own homes, who aren't able to become engaged with their loved ones, who aren't able to form deep and lasting friendships, this disconnection that's happening. And yet, in our congregations, we have this place where we can connect with each other. And more than that, we can connect with the world. We can go out into the world, see the injustice that's being done. We're able to, and we have been changing the world for a couple thousand years. Somehow that's gotten lost. I know when I was at Starbucks the other day, I was looking for like the fair trade coffee, and you have to look through, 26 bags of coffee to find the one bag that's fairly traded. And so I always have to ask, where's the fair trade coffee? And they'll show me, and so I'll pick it up, and sometimes I buy it when I have to. And so I look at that and know that Starbucks does cause marketing. Cause marketing is something that people have started, that big businesses have started. And what they'll do is that they'll say, okay, if you buy this product, then a certain percentage will go to help AIDS in Africa. Or if you buy this iPad or this iPod or this red T-shirt or these things, then it will help change the world. The other day I went to Body Shop. I was buying like a tube of lipstick, and the person at the counter told me for 20 minutes how much I was changing the world with this tube of lipstick. It was a tube of lipstick. We can learn something from this, because we have been changing the world for a long time. We've been the hands and feet of Jesus Christ out in the world, changing things. And yet, somehow that's gotten drowned out. People don't understand that we were there in Haiti. We were there in New Orleans. We were the first ones and often the last ones when devastation hits. These are things that we have been doing for a long, long time. And they're also things that a new generation is longing for. Ways to connect with God, ways to form community, form tribes, whatever metaphor you use, but ways to love their neighbors. And ways to change the world, to feed the hungry, to help the homeless.